and we'll just give a quick intro, and then we'll get down to the root of it. Next slide, please. So a little bit about The Sector. The Sector is a management consulting firm headquartered in Toronto that focuses on social finance and social innovation. We work with a portfolio of clients that I like to describe as a sample cross-section of the growing social finance ecosystem in Canada. So social enterprises of all different categories, charities starting businesses, charities acting more like businesses in terms of harnessing market forces to become financially sustainable and growing the capacity to deliver on their mission, for-profit companies with quantifiable and demonstrative social impact, etc. Everybody knows the definitions. And then we work with supporting ecosystem actors like incubators, impact investment funds, universities, colleges, post-secondary educations in general that are creating programs and trying to introduce talent and training to build robustness of the labor supply into the sector. And then upstream, we work with investors, policymakers, so in that group, governments, foundations that are deploying governance as well as capital to grow the social finance ecosystem in Canada. I think that's a pretty good description of us in a nutshell. Next slide, please. I think a little quick background on Bina Therikin and myself, Bradford Turner, who are your two presenters today, also partners at The Sector. I come to participate in the social finance world by way of institutional fundraising and international development that then evolved into impact investing, entrepreneurship, and management consulting. My background kind of stems primarily from working in the university space, raising institutional funding for research institutes and large-scale research projects in a university setting, evolving into capital campaign fundraising for hospitals, and then into the world of international development, where overseeing institutional fundraising and microfinance and social entrepreneurship at Save the Children Canada then lent itself to overseeing an impact fund scaling across sub-Saharan Africa with Engineers Without Borders Canada as their director of impact investments, until with a group of other like-minded change makers, I think is the word to say, founding The Sector in 2015. And I think that's as far as you need to know in terms of the narrative that's relevant to really add value to our chat today. And on that note, Bina, perhaps you could give a quick little intro.
Sure, great. Thanks, Bradford. Just in terms of my background, I come from a management consulting background. I had worked in the public sector practices across the consulting firms of IBM, Deloitte, and Ernst & Young, primarily focusing in the health services, social services, and education spaces. I guess collectively, we would call them the human services space. I had got involved in impact investment and social impact innovation, I should say too, as I had worked for a number of years in the various public sector systems that I mentioned. And there were kind of exploratory models that were taking place across the pond, largely in Europe, probably UK, where they were creating impact investment models that were integrated with government systems. And knowing what I knew about that time in terms of generating impacts in our human services systems, there wasn't much of a, I would say, catalyst or infrastructure to facilitate that. The funding incentives weren't quite structured in that way. And learning about these models that were being experimented on, I thought just the knowledge that I had and where there were deficiencies in our systems, this can be completely integrated into Canadian human services systems. And was part of a team that kind of spearheaded understanding what offerings can we as a consulting firm provide in this space. That was back in 2014-ish too. And given the slow uptake of that, it didn't quite land yet for the consulting firms, but with the launch of the social finance strategy in Canada, which is what the IRP is part of, back in 2018, I thought it was definitely opportune time in Canada to really build out the robustness of this emerging market, and also provide consulting offerings around it. So through my interactions working in the various sectors, had worked with Bradford before, understood where the sector was going, joined forces with him. And we largely now work with many social enterprises in terms of bringing them to, I would say, I guess you can categorize it, and we'll talk about this, into a point of investment readiness. But as we'll discuss, it's really growing, expanding, achieving that operational excellence in their social enterprise models in order to grow the business, but to grow the business in order to grow or scale their impacts and realize those impacts at a broader scale. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. We'll now get into the topic of today. And typically we have more folks here, and it looks like this is not even working actually. But we have a small group here, and we've taken polls before in terms of just understanding where folks are at, where they're coming from, and then also just understanding their awareness of the investment readiness program. So partly due because we have a small group, but I also think my screen's gone blank. I'm just going to ask folks either in the chat or to get off mute to either identify if they are from a for-profit or not-for-profit social enterprise, and just provide, high, medium, low understanding of the IRP at this point.
And excuse me, while folks do that, I'm just going to make sure that we give our land acknowledgement, as is protocol for the sector in having any kind of gathering. So at the sector, we acknowledge that the land on which we work is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the Credit. Our community is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and we recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land.
Sorry, I was off mute there. Thanks you, Bradford, for that. And we see some responses to my questions in the chat. Sue from a not-for-profit charity with a medium understanding of the IRP. Kathy Lewis from both sectors, low to medium understanding. Dan as well, for-profit with a social mission. Don't have a lot of familiarity with the program. And Joanne from the Community Foundation and speaking to those who might apply. Thanks for joining us, Joanne. And Marguerite, won't be able to unmute, but thank you for joining. And Joan, we have from a charity, low to medium. So yeah, probably low to medium. So hopefully today's discussion will provide some further insights to you folks. And we can then provide an overview right now of the program. I think I got things working now, so I'm going to attempt to share screen again and continue where we left off. Okay. Thanks for your patience there. Okay, so just to give you an overview of the investment readiness program. So as I mentioned in my introduction, the investment readiness program is part of the broader Canadian social finance strategy. And the intent, sorry about that. The intent of the broader social finance strategy is really to create that ecosystem or that pool of social enterprises that are creating impacts to mobilize positive societal outcomes through their self-sustaining funding model. And that's to attract a pool of impact investors. So the broader vision is that there will be a fund announced of over $755 million that will go into the social finance ecosystem. And the IRP is really that first stage of this, where they have plans, they have distributed some of the monies so far in the past, I would say 3 years. But about 50 million has been committed to social purpose organizations. And these include charities, social enterprises, the for-profits, not-for-profits, and also cooperatives in order to build that social finance market. So what's needed really to create attractive investable social enterprises? Well, it's to have a product or service offering that's really that's meeting a growing market need, business as usual, and also, as mentioned, that financially sustainable business model. Now, it does not need to be for profit, could be self-funded or breaking even, or for those that have a social enterprise that are part of a not-for-profit or charity, have those profits reinvested into the charitable or not-for-profit arm. But definitely what's also clear too is that there is the organization that is generating those social impacts. So that's really what, there's no clear definition on a social enterprise, but I guess if we were to talk about those attributes, those are really those three that the government of Canada is looking for to build out this ecosystem. And as mentioned, maybe to give some kind of perspective in terms of a social enterprise in comparison as we talk about businesses or charities. As you can see on the left side, charities and those that are part of charities are quite familiar. There's a large emphasis on the social value that's generated. A lot of the programming is through grants or donations, not really self-generating kind of models that are built into the organization. And as we move all the way to the right, it's quite the opposite. They are purely self-generating to the point where they are in excess and they're generating profit and operating as a business, as we all are fairly familiar with, I'm sure. So really the social enterprises fall in between. It is that balance of generating that social value and then also creating that business model that can sustain itself so that the organization is able to meet the growing demands in the market and then also able to propagate its impacts across its purpose. So with the investment readiness program, we often refer to this at the sector. We go to the saying of, yes, we can give you fish, but we would rather teach you how to fish. And the fish analogy here is probably moving away from thinking about this as a grant. Really, the investment readiness program should be phrased as non-repayment capital. And that's because it is that catalyst to enable organizations to access that broader pool of funds. So that broader capital options that they can access. And so it is getting them to a point where they are attractive to access those pool of funds and therefore then help grow their business and, provide food for those loved ones that they're intended to do. So really the analogy there is around serving the population of that social purpose. So as mentioned, the IRP is that catalyst to that broader pool of funds in the social finance fund ecosystem. And the ability to access that fund really is going to come from organizations that demonstrate that they have the ability to adopt social financing. So they're starting to build out a strategy in place for that, not relying on their traditional models. So if they are not for profit, moving away from just a grant or donation oriented and looking at ways to diversify funds. And on the opposite with the for-profits, yes, generating through revenues, but then also understanding how impacts are important to be integrated into the business model to be able to adopt social financing and the requirements of taking on capital of that form. Demonstrating that the organization is working towards operational excellence, and this is probably standard business practices and goals, actually probably even across any type of organization. And this is really to be able to be in a position where you can really grow to scale, respond to market needs, also probably be more efficient in delivering impacts. And that's where we get to the next point around having those pathways to impact realization. Definitely impact investors are looking, the distinguishing part of social enterprises is that the impacts that they are generating. And there will be emphasis in terms of understanding what those impacts are, how to measure them, having mechanisms to measure and report on them, and really demonstrating that emphasis, demonstrating that evidence that they are being realized. Also delivering value as an enterprise that is monetizable, which, you know, it is revenue generating. And then also one important feature too, and this might be new for some folks too, is really understanding, I would say maybe the investor world. So building those capabilities in the organization to understand that network of investors that could be potentially accessible to them. But then also on the other side of that is starting to have plans to understand the different types of investment vehicles that an organization can take on, and being ready to be able to take on, because there are considerations around, well, financial management, reporting, as we mentioned, but also the risk management pieces around taking on investment. So these essentially are, I would say, kind of the broad strokes of projects that can be proposed as part of the investment readiness program, because it's moving them towards that, that continuum to be able to access the social finance fund. And really, it is expected through this program that a lot of these capabilities are not innate in within organizations. So there will be a reliance on expert advisor services to be brought in as part of the projects. So just in terms of the other aspect, another way of looking at kind of demonstration that you're moving towards investment readiness. And this is taken directly from the program guidelines of the IRP. You'll see the continuum of being investor ready, from getting started, having it underway, establishing it, and then the last stage being ready. There are dimensions of this that are being examined, which is around the actual social finance awareness. And then also the business model and plan. So moving towards more of that rigorous big business model that has financials, that has projections and has risk management built into it. The structure of the organization itself, so that it has the right structures, capabilities, skills, but that it's actually built to support the expected growth and requirements of the organization to fulfill the aspects of a social enterprise. As we mentioned, impact measurement and reporting across the continuum, there might be plans, kind of notionally understand what your impacts. As an organization gets more mature or sophisticated in this dimension, they have that clear impact measurement plan and reporting plan. I would even argue they have a body of evidence that really does demonstrate the longitudinal impacts of the organization, of its social purpose. And that network development piece too. So this is largely emphasized on the investor piece. I think also this would be integrated with system partners, where there is a full understanding of the various partners of the organization and that they're actually being established. It's kind of a channel marketing approach where you are utilizing partners in the ecosystem to mobilize the growth of the enterprise, mobilize the impacts of the enterprise. So that's one aspect of network development. And the other piece is around the investor relations, as we mentioned before, building that understanding of the various types of impact investors. What are the requirements around them, and what does the organization need to do to facilitate that type of relationship and eventually taking on that investment? So in terms of the investment readiness program that's open right now, there is 2 streams, the Explore stream and the Stabilize and Build stream. Both are available at various amounts. I'll describe each of the streams, what's with kind of the parameters of the scope of these streams. The first one, the Explore stream, is really at that idea stage and at very early stages of exploring, developing, testing the social prize idea. So it might entail doing some market research, doing some organizational assessment in terms of understanding whether it can build out those capabilities of having a social enterprise. For this stream, they've also bucketed its specific technical assistance in it too. So it might be that the organization already knows that it can have a social enterprise, but they require like legal assistance to IP their product, or for the cases of a not-for-profit or charity, legal advice and guidance in terms of how to structure that within their CRA requirements. The other one is the and that Explore stream, it's available between $10,000 to $25,000, and we'll go through all the parameters of the projects that they're expecting. For the second stream, which is about $30,000 to $75,000, that's available for those enterprises that apply for that. These are for more well-established social enterprises. They probably already have a product solution. It's out in the market. It is generating revenue, maybe not necessarily making the profit, or it's being at least tested. It might be pre-revenue where it's being tested. So a little further along, and that's the stream where the sector really does provide, emphasizes where we provide our support services. And it's in the buckets that we talked about, and we'll review again with you in a later slide. So in terms of the eligibility criteria for the IRP, and this is taken directly from the program guidelines, needs to have a goods or services or product that generates revenue, or at least a plan for a product to generate revenue, the intentionality to seek out impact investment, a CRA registration, either charitable or business registration, prior to September 2021. I think they did want to make a cutoff to at least see some traction in terms of building out the social enterprise structure or structure to support that. And then also having that plan and capacity and expertise being able to take that on for the proposed project. So in terms of the eligible expenses, the expenses are for the social purpose organization, which is also known as social enterprise, to advance them towards being investment ready. And if you remember the dimensions I went through and kind of the discussions of what they are seeking in terms of social enterprises, it's working towards those dimensions there. It includes working with a service provider that has expertise in the area of business ideation or market research, business planning. I would also say impact measurement, and also coaching in investment relations. All activities that encourage the growth and scaling of the impact and getting the enterprise to a point where it can take on investment. And the project timelines are expected to be between February 15th to December 15th of next year. There are concessions if the timelines for the IRP to get back in terms of awarding, they do make adjustments in terms of timelines, and that gets all negotiated at the award process. So those entail the eligible expenses. The ineligible expenses are those regular operating costs and ongoing administrative costs, or procuring large capital or major capital, I should say, such as real estate. However, they have made concessions this round where the budget can be, a part of the budget can be reasonably allocated for the organization itself. So up to 25% related overhead that is related to the project. So the staff time, any other resources that are used by the organization itself to execute on the project can be included as part of that 25% of the total budget. So hopefully that gives more light, sheds more light in terms of eligibility criteria around the IRP. Since as we mentioned, there is a reliance from many organizations to take on expert services for these projects. The sector does provide service offerings in these areas, and we provide IRP support in terms of advising on the development of a strong application. In the introduction, as Bradford mentioned, we are entrenched in the social finance ecosystem, understand the needs, the requirements, understand the ecosystem players, and can really position the applications to be aligned with the goals of the Canadian social finance strategy. We do have a facilitated approach that's structured, streamlined, to work collaboratively with the organizations in terms of developing that application content. We don't take on the whole thing ourselves because there's a lot of background content on the organization that is actually very quick. It's maybe long, but it's not in terms of number of questions, but there are a bunch of checkboxes that need to be taken by or answered by the organization itself. Where there's questions, we provide guidance on that too. And we do create those partnerships with the organizations that we work with. Just understanding their plans in terms of how they're building out their social enterprise. We also have other avenues in terms of exploring opportunities to build capacity within social enterprises. The IRP is just one of many programs that are available out there in terms of building out an organization's capacity to take on investment. Anecdotally, I don't think there's really any published studies on this because it's hard to get the data on this, but I'm sure it is somewhere. But given our relations with the various players in the social finance ecosystem, we've kind of estimated about 20% of applications have secured funding. From what we see in the numbers, for the most, not what receiving probably the midpoint of available funding to them and below that. Very few applications receive the full funding request or the full, I should say the maximum amount that could be allocated for the respective streams. So in terms of how we've helped clients before in the investment readiness program, we have two case studies here, and it's a for-profit case study as well as a not-for-profit. And we can talk about just our experience in terms of working with them through this process. So the first one being Everyday Heroes Kids, which is a for-profit social enterprise. I would say at the time of the IRP, very much a startup social enterprise. It is an organization that is focused on developing an online platform in terms of creating a one-stop shop for families with children that have care needs to navigate through the pediatric care system. If anyone has been in that situation, myself working in healthcare for many years, I've worked with many organizations in the system to try to address this problem. And Everyday Heroes Kids, where the founder has lived experience doing this, had developed this business concept idea and built out a prototype of this platform. When we did connect with, we'll call it EHK for short, at the time of the investment readiness program, not familiar with it at all, was part of one of the university incubators here in Toronto, and was, because it was a tech firm, was going down the angle of the traditional kind of pursuits for investment, the VC route. So the very strong emphasis on financial performance and business growth, and not really understanding how it really can demonstrate its value through system integration. Now, one thing that they did very well was they established good partnerships with some of the major pediatric organizations in the system. I'm calling Blurview, Sick Kids, but it was more from a branding and marketing approach. And when we came in, we really provided coaching, guidance, and advice in terms of how to leverage those partnerships in order to really grow your organization, its business model, leveraging the assets, the networks of those partnerships, and really integrating into the value of the system. So it took on a different lens. It was not the hockey stick journey that most venture capitalists probably would ideally want to seek out. But this is where we were positioning them for impact investment versus traditional forms of investment. And that piece of having that system integration really facilitated the demonstration of their pathways to realize impacts in the system. So a bit of quite a strategic change for this organization. The organization has kind of done a 180, really considers themselves as a system integrated partner in the pediatric care system, really emphasizes on its in impacts, and has access impact investment through this process. Still in the growing stages, but has afforded itself capital in order to give its runway to demonstrate its impacts and grow out the business. The other organization that we helped was Construct, which is a social enterprise that is part of a charitable organization, Blue Door. Now, they had already established their social enterprise, and it was an employment development services organization in the skills trade industry or the construction industry. Definitely a need for this, and it aligned with the overall charitable mandate in terms of breaking down the barriers, or addressing the barriers, I should say, to access affordable housing. And one of the key enablers of that is having sustainable, good paying jobs for the long term. So skills trade, where there's an obvious gap in the industry, and it aligned with their whole area of providing shelters. And so they spun off this social enterprise and had operated it with in one region when we did connect with them. Was definitely demonstrating success in terms of growth and also in terms of impacts. They did want to expand the model out further, but needed to go through that, I would say, marketing approach, but partner marketing approach, because as they were going to enter into a new region, they kind of needed to establish that local ecosystem all over again. And so when we came on, we proposed that as the project. They got, I believe, close to the maximum funding to really build out and duplicate this model again in another region through that ecosystem building approach, which we facilitated for the organization. That organization has now created a toolkit where this model can be leveraged by other regions, and they went off on their own and did that in another region. And now they are looking at they're looking at broader expansion strategies across Canada, and have accessed social finance through foundations that they have partnered with that give startup capital to start up other regional models. And now we are also working with them to look at other forms of accessing social finance to grow out their business. So hopefully that paints a picture on certain projects, ways that we've supported organizations through the IRP, and helped them get investment ready, and have continued that longstanding relationship with them to also grow up their business, and also access the appropriate capital that they have access to. Just in terms of the sector, hopefully this came through. We do provide that multi-sector engagement approach, partnership building, relationship building. We have that subject matter expertise given our diverse backgrounds in the not-for-profit, public sectors, in for-profit sectors as well, around social innovation, the public policy, the impact measurement, capital fundraising, and social finance in general. And then also just providing that structured project management and delivery approach. So in terms of working with the sector, as part of the IRP, we do break down the process in steps or stages, I should say. So connecting with the social enterprise to really understand where they're at and what their future plans are, identifying where they can have opportunities to grow their enterprise or make it to a point of being investor ready. Having a couple of discussions in terms of really mapping out that strategy for the organization, understanding its clear purpose, its revenue growth plan, its investment readiness strategy, and then really structuring a project plan around that. Then if that's all agreed upon, the enterprise itself will start up the application, and we go through a collaborative approach in terms of working out through the various sections, with conducting a number of quality reviews to ensure it's meeting the program objectives, and then have the organization submit that. These are the various sections of the application. There's an eligibility check, which is just a few questions, and it's important just to make sure that that's cleared before going through the rest of the application. But as I mentioned previously, there is a lot of background organizational information that's required in the application. That's pretty much sections 1 and 2, which the enterprise completes itself. We take on that project information, so structuring out the project objectives and the work plan. And then there's some general information, more surveying information, I would say, about the organization in section 4. And then there are some documents that they look to upload, just some background documents in terms of corporate filings, the management bios. Some of these are actually optional, the project budget, and then the final section is just the sign off and submission for the enterprise to complete. So just in terms of important dates, yes, just in less than 2 weeks, the Community Foundations of Canada applications are due. And there is another application open for the Foundation of Black Communities, which is due December 1st. Now, it's important to note, though, that they are on the same portal. So if you are eligible for both, we'd recommend you go for that November 22nd timeline and submit it for that. If you're only eligible for the Foundation of Black Communities, then you have until December 1st. And just recently, for those that would be eligible, the Women's Foundation is launching another round, and that's to be open in November 30th. I'm going to guess that that's probably going to be open right before the holidays. So applications will be underway as well for that round. So that covers an overview of our presentation in terms of the investment readiness program. Hopefully that provided all of you folks with more insights on the program itself, its objectives, how it fits in with the Canadian social finance strategy, and then also the sector and how we bring our expertise to help organizations through this